This is a condensed reading of Spiritualism and the New Psychology by Millais Culpin, offered as a brief reflection on its core insights. The unconscious. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, our thoughts flow in an endless stream. One idea leads to another, shaped by memories, emotions, and the world around us. But what we consciously think is only a small part of the mind's work. Beneath that stream, in the depths of the unconscious, lies something far greater, a hidden force that influences us in ways we barely notice. The unconscious isn't just a storage room for old memories. It works behind the scenes, affecting our decisions, shaping our instincts, and even slipping into our speech. Ever struggled to recall a name that's on the tip of your tongue? Or accidentally called someone by the wrong name? These moments aren't random. They happen because thoughts buried deep inside us interfere with what we mean to say. There's a story about a man who, when asked the author of a book, answered Robert Brown instead of Robert Smith. A harmless mistake, right? But when he thought about it, he realized something strange. He had recently received a letter about a man named Brown, someone he disliked. And as it turned out, he also had strong feelings against Smith. His unconscious had made the connection, linking two people he resented, even though he wasn't aware of it at the time. But the unconscious isn't just a trickster, it's also a guide. Think about intuition, that sudden feeling that something is right or wrong before you can explain why. A skilled doctor glances at a patient and instantly suspects a diagnosis. A driver hesitates before making a turn, avoiding an unseen danger. These aren't coincidences. They're flashes of knowledge, drawn from years of hidden experience. A young eye doctor once examined a patient complaining of vision problems. Without thinking, he wrote down a possible diagnosis: tobacco amblyopia. When his senior asked how he knew, he simply said, "He looked like it." But he hadn't guessed. His unconscious had picked up subtle clues, perhaps the man's age, his symptoms, or even the faint smell of tobacco. And then there's déjà vu, that eerie sense of familiarity in a place you've never been. It happens when a small detail, maybe a scent, a shadow, or a sound, triggers an old, forgotten memory. But instead of giving you the full picture, the unconscious only delivers a fragment, leaving your mind to fill in the rest. That incomplete recognition turns into a strange and mysterious feeling: I've been here before. Some people, like those raised in the wilderness, develop an uncanny sense of direction. They don't rely on maps or landmarks, they just know. A traveler once rode through dense bushland with a boy who had lived there all his life. The boy confidently pointed the way, though he'd never been to that specific place before. When asked how he knew, he simply said, "That's the way." His unconscious had processed tiny details, subtle changes in the land, the feel of the air, things he wasn't even aware of noticing. The unconscious isn't something we can see or touch, but it shapes every part of our lives. It's more than a shadowy background to our thoughts, it's a silent partner, guiding our choices, protecting us, and sometimes revealing things we didn't even know we knew. Complexes. Every man believes his opinions are founded on reason, yet observation reveals that beliefs stem more from upbringing, social influences, and environment than pure logic. This is evident in politics, where individuals hold firm to views shaped by early influences rather than rational analysis. Two neighbors may easily exchange gardening tips and even persuade each other on certain points, yet on political matters, no amount of discussion will alter their opposing stances. Each believes his side is the product of reason, while dismissing the other's view as irrational. Similarly, moral beliefs are deeply ingrained and rarely examined. A discussion on polygamy, for instance, will provoke passionate opposition from those conditioned to accept monogamy as the only moral structure, despite examples of functional polygamous societies. People rationalize their positions, convinced they are based on logic, when in fact they are shaped by their cultural upbringing. This process of pseudo-reasoning is known as rationalization. It allows people to maintain contradictions without recognizing them. A businessman who engages in dishonest dealings but donates generously to charity may see no conflict between his actions. Likewise, a religious man caught in financial fraud is often labeled a hypocrite, yet he may have initially justified minor transgressions through rationalization until they became part of a separate, unexamined mental compartment. These entrenched beliefs and patterns of thought form what psychologists call complexes, a system of ideas centered around a theme, whether conscious or unconscious. Politics, religion, and personal ambitions all create such complexes, influencing how we interpret the world. A photographer and a botanist on the same train journey will notice different details, their perception shaped by their respective complexes. While one consciously acknowledges his interest in photography, the political partisan denies the influence of his complex, believing his views to be purely rational. Scientific training seeks to eliminate complex-driven thinking in favor of objective reasoning. In the exact sciences, this is largely successful, yet even the most rigorously trained minds fall back into complex thinking when they step outside their specialized fields. Instincts, unlike acquired influences, are innate and shared across the species. However, as Benjamin Kidd observed, learned fears can integrate with instincts. A duckling, initially unafraid of humans, quickly adopts its mother's terror and never unlearns it. Similarly, deeply ingrained beliefs become indistinguishable from instinct, creating an unshakable conviction. This explains the German mindset before World War I, where the belief in the right of might was so deeply embedded that only national catastrophe could shake it. Complexes shape not only individual thought but the collective psyche of entire nations. Forgetting and repression. Forgetting is as mysterious as remembering. We assume that memories fade, but do they truly disappear? More often, what we call forgetting is simply an inability to recall, while the memory itself remains buried in the unconscious. This is especially evident in cases where forgotten experiences resurface under the right circumstances. One powerful form of forgetting is repression, where a person actively pushes painful memories out of consciousness. A soldier suffering from shell shock may claim to have forgotten his war experiences, but his distressing emotions persist, surfacing as nightmares, anxiety, or irrational fears. The memory is not gone, it is merely hidden, and when retrieved, it often brings relief. Some extreme cases involve total amnesia for entire periods of life, where even when told of their own past, sufferers fail to recognize it. This demonstrates that forgetting is not always voluntary. In some cases, the mind forces itself to forget unbearable experiences as a defense mechanism. However, emotions linked to these memories do not vanish, leading to unexplained fears or anxieties. Beyond trauma, forgetting can happen in subtle ways. A man who repeatedly embellishes a story may eventually believe his own exaggerations, forgetting where truth ends and fiction begins. Similarly, literary plagiarism sometimes occurs when a forgotten passage from a book resurfaces in an author's mind as an original thought. The human mind also represses desires and conflicts that cannot be resolved. A person trapped in an unhappy marriage or an unfulfilling career may suppress their discontent, believing they have accepted their situation. However, unresolved conflicts often manifest as stress, neurosis, or unconscious behaviors. Even childhood daydreams, long forgotten, may influence us in unexpected ways. Freud and his followers argue that these early fantasies remain active in the unconscious, subtly shaping our personalities and choices throughout life. Dissociation. Ever found yourself absent-mindedly tapping a pen or shifting in your seat without realizing it? That's dissociation in action. It's how a skilled pianist can play a complex piece while chatting or how a driver navigates traffic while carrying on a conversation. Our minds split tasks between different streams of awareness, one handling the routine, the other focused elsewhere. But dissociation can go much deeper. In automatic writing, for example, a person may produce words without knowing what they're writing, as if a hidden part of their mind is in control. This reveals how thoughts and memories, usually buried in the unconscious, can surface in surprising ways. More extreme cases involve abrupt dissociation, where a person momentarily becomes someone else. A war veteran, for instance, might suddenly relive a forgotten trauma, acting it out in vivid detail, only to have no memory of it afterward. This is the foundation of double personalities, where a suppressed identity takes over, leaving the original self unaware of what has happened. Dissociation isn't just psychological theory, it's woven into literature. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde dramatizes the battle between two personalities within one man, while A Tale of Two Cities shows Dr. Manette slipping back into his prison life without realizing it. At its core, dissociation is a sliding scale. At one end, it's everyday multitasking. At the other, it's a complete mental break. In some cases, people wall off parts of their minds into logic-tight compartments, maintaining beliefs or memories that contradict their reality. This explains why seemingly rational people can cling to bizarre delusions. Dissociation is the hidden mechanism behind everything from simple habits to profound psychological disorders, a secret force shaping the way we think, act, and remember. Water divining. In many parts of the world, water divining, or dowsing, is not just folklore, it's a practice used by individuals and even official organizations to locate underground water. A dowser, armed with a forked twig, traditionally hazel, walks over the land, waiting for the twig to twist and signal the presence of water. Some claim it works for metal too. But is this truly an unknown force, or is something else at play? The author, skeptical but open-minded, decides to investigate after hearing an impressive account of a local dowser. The demonstration begins. The twig rises in response to buried pipes, much to the awe of the onlookers. Yet, inconsistencies emerge. The twig reacts where no water is known, misplaces a pipe, and, curiously, the dowser seems guided by the expressions and cues of those watching. When the author tries it himself, he replicates the effect with ease. Is it a divine gift, or a simple trick of muscular movement and unconscious bias? Through careful analysis, the author reveals the mechanics of the twig's movement, a subconscious force, yes, but not a mystical one. The dowser's belief in his ability is real, but it may stem from a psychological dissociation, where his mind suppresses the knowledge of how he is truly influencing the twig. To him, it feels like an external force, yet it's his own body at work. This is reinforced by another dowser's claim of bodily magnetism, a belief born from genuine conviction, not deceit. The power of suggestion, subconscious perception, and selective memory all conspire to make dowsing feel real, even to its practitioners. But as one old Scotsman, who rejected the twig, revealed, the real skill lies in reading the land, not in unseen forces. Water divining, then, is not a battle between science and the supernatural, but between observation and self-deception. And in the end, the mind, not the twig, is the true divining rod. Suggestion. The power of suggestion is a plausible explanation of varied phenomena. By it, the feelings of a crowd are swayed, fashions are spread, mistakes are made, and beliefs are imposed upon the multitude. In the production of hypnotic and hysterical manifestations, the words power of suggestion and personal magnetism are often used as an explanation of all things visible and invisible. Personal magnetism and its kindred phrases, which imply the existence of some subtle physical force, are, except when used figuratively, mere incoherences. However, suggestion is an undoubted cause of certain effects, and we must try to understand its meaning. McDougall defines suggestion as a process of communication resulting in the acceptance with conviction of the communicated proposition in the absence of logical grounds for its acceptance. Our thinking, apart from observing cause and effect in daily life, is generally a matter of complexes rather than logic. Hence, using this definition, the greater part of our accepted propositions owe their acceptance to suggestion. This is true regarding most political, religious, and social beliefs. Since children believe what they are taught primarily because their teacher says so, there seems to be little knowledge or opinion of the abstract that suggestion does not influence. If a suggestion aligns with existing complexes in the hearer's mind, acceptance is likely. This partly explains the psychology of crowds and the power of oratory, which appeals to emotions and prejudice rather than reason. The belief that one's fellows believe something is often sufficient to convince the ordinary man, and the widespread existence of a belief is frequently used as an argument to prove its truth. This tendency is readily recognized in people of different races and superstitions. For instance, an educated Chinese man once assured me that blood from relatives would mix in a bowl of water, whereas blood from strangers would remain separate. He claimed this test was used to resolve disputed relationships. When I expressed skepticism, he insisted, "It's true, quite true, everyone knows it." Similarly, an Englishman discussing telegony, the influence of a first mating on subsequent progeny, argued that the widespread belief among dog breeders proved its truth. Comparing this argument with my Chinese acquaintances' reasoning illustrated how similar the causes of belief are among all people. Man tends to believe what his peers believe and act as they act. Trotter has defined this tendency as the herd instinct, which plays an important role in gregarious animals, including humans. However, if suggestion were to be equated with the herd instinct, it would explain too much, necessitating a narrowing of its definition or the adoption of a different term. Suggestion is particularly used to explain the acceptance of propositions that an ordinary person in their normal state of mind would not accept, especially in abnormal states such as hypnosis and hysteria. An authoritative and confident manner facilitates the acceptance of suggestion, as known to confidence tricksters and writers of advertisements or political articles. However, a person may be resistant to suggestions from opposing viewpoints while readily accepting absurdities from a familiar source. This reflects an active desire to accept propositions that align with pre-existing complexes. As these complexes become more removed from reason, this desire strengthens. This tendency, which I term receptivity, extends beyond merely accepting propositions. It includes anticipating or guessing them, picking up hints about what others are thinking, and reflecting them as if they originated within the receiver's own mind. In cases of hysteria, for instance, a patient may present a paralyzed limb with apparent insensitivity to pain. Initial tests may provoke flinching, but once the patient believes they should not feel pain, insensibility is established. Unlike true sensory loss, the patient does not injure the limb unintentionally, indicating the phenomenon is psychological rather than physiological. Babinski demonstrated this by blindfolding patients and asking them what they felt without introducing the notion of insensibility. His method produced fewer cases of sensory loss than the conventional "do you feel that?" approach, which inadvertently suggested an expected outcome. This phenomenon may be explained by dissociation, where consciousness is split, relegating control of the supposed loss of sensation to an unconscious stream. Jung insightfully remarks, "It should long ago have been realized that a suggestion is only accepted by one it suits." This pseudo-scientific talk about suggestion is based upon the unconscious superstition that suggestion actually possesses some magic power. No one succumbs to suggestion unless from the very bottom of his heart he be willing to cooperate. While rejecting any magical attributes of suggestion, its power is undeniable. At a dinner party, if one person suggests the fish is tainted, others will often agree, though they would have eaten it without hesitation otherwise. Likewise, in medical training, one student's confident assertion of hearing a heart murmur can lead others to hear it too, even if none exists. Certain conditions, such as fatigue or sleep, facilitate suggestibility due to reduced mental resistance. For example, when working in a hospital, I was once awakened at night and mistakenly believed the patient was mine. Though I had no such patient, my drowsy state made me accept the suggestion, whereas full wakefulness would have prompted me to reject it. Hypnotic suggestibility may be viewed as an extension of this non-resistance, though it also involves an active inclination to accept suggestions. Autosuggestion, another aspect of this phenomenon, involves self-imposed suggestions resulting in physical or psychological effects. Sensations experienced by water diviners or table turners, as well as some hysterical symptoms, fall into this category. Such sensations may be real to the person experiencing them, though they originate in the mind rather than external reality. The emotional state of the subject is crucial in determining suggestibility. Strong emotions like wonder or terror can create collective delusions. Many historical supernatural events were likely due to mass suggestion, as emotions spread among a crowd seeking external justification for their feelings. Once an object of fear or wonder is suggested, individuals readily perceive it as real. A practical example occurred in France during the arrival of wounded soldiers. A group of medical professionals, including myself, examined a head injury with suspected pulsation, an indication of brain exposure. All agreed on seeing pulsation, but subsequent examination revealed an intact skull. Our collective expectation had shaped our perception. Similarly, ghost sightings often involve strong emotions and group reinforcement. A well-documented case in Sydney, Australia, describes multiple witnesses claiming to see an apparition reflected in a wardrobe. The narrator insists suggestion was not a factor, yet the sequence of events, excited individuals seeing what others had already described, suggests otherwise. The human mind's susceptibility to suggestion, particularly in emotionally charged situations, explains many such cases. Finally, the widespread belief in the transit of Russian troops through England in 1914 illustrates mass credulity. Although entirely untrue, the rumor gained traction because people wanted to believe it, reinforcing each other's convictions. Many even claimed personal experiences of the event, demonstrating the suggestibility of the human mind when influenced by the herd instinct. Understanding suggestion is crucial in recognizing how beliefs are formed, perceptions shaped, and collective delusions created. Whether in everyday life, hypnosis, or mass hysteria, suggestion remains a powerful psychological force, governing much of human thought and behavior. Hypnotism. The history of hypnotism is interwoven with that of charlatanry, yet at certain times it has earned a respectable place in medical practice. The temple sleep of ancient Greek medicine was an early form of hypnosis, but the art fell into obscurity until the era of Mesmer. Unfortunately, Mesmer's methods were tainted with spectacle and quackery, which contributed to the skepticism that still lingers around its legitimate therapeutic use. Public perception of hypnotism remains steeped in mystery and distrust. Literature and popular culture have portrayed the hypnotic power as an almost supernatural force, wielded by enigmatic figures capable of bending others to their will. The decline of public mesmerism exhibitions has seen their place taken by thought-reading performances, which continue to satisfy the human fascination with the occult. The myth of the mesmeric eye, whose pupil allegedly expands and contracts at the will of its possessor, has been linked by imaginative writers to figures as diverse as Lord Kitchener and Rasputin. Yet no physiologist has confirmed such a phenomenon. Similarly, the concept of willpower as the primary instrument of hypnosis is largely a product of fiction. In reality, the process hinges on the subject's willing participation and heightened suggestibility. Only a highly credulous person can be hypnotized against their will. At the outset, the subject's full cooperation is essential, though with repeated sessions their suggestibility increases, which may give the impression of diminished willpower. The induction of hypnosis requires quiet surroundings and mutual confidence between operator and subject. The subject's focus is directed exclusively to the hypnotist's words, often aided by a mechanical technique, such as fixation on a small object, which induces drowsiness. Success depends largely on the skill and persuasive ability of the operator. Achieving a deep hypnotic state may require multiple sessions. In light hypnosis, the subject remains aware and retains memory of the session, allowing suggestions for behavioral change, such as breaking a habit, to be more readily accepted. In deeper hypnosis, memory of the session may be lost, bodily responses such as paralysis or insensitivity to pain may be induced, and post-hypnotic suggestions can be implanted to take effect after waking. The increased suggestibility of the hypnotic subject arises from a partial or total suspension of their stream of consciousness. With their critical faculties in abeyance, they lack the ability to judge incoming assertions, akin to a dreaming person who perceives no contradiction in defying the laws of gravity. The unconscious becomes accessible, permitting suggestions to take root even if the subject is unaware of them. Experimentally, subjects instructed under hypnosis to perform an arbitrary action upon waking often create rational justifications for their behavior, unaware of the true cause. Despite this heightened responsiveness, the subject retains volition and will not act against deeply ingrained moral principles. For instance, if led to believe an imaginary person occupies a chair, they may comply with instructions to engage with them. However, an honest subject will resist a suggestion to commit theft, whereas one with a predisposition to dishonesty may succumb. A physician once recounted an illustrative case. He had successfully used hypnosis to make a patient averse to whiskey, only to find the man later intoxicated on beer. Further hypnotic efforts failed to dissuade him from beer consumption. The reason was simple: the patient had consciously decided he did not wish to be cured of that particular habit. Hypnosis exemplifies dissociation. As induction progresses, the stream of consciousness is either reduced or eliminated, and a substitute stream emerges, comprising the operator's suggestions and unconscious material. This process bears relation to techniques like automatic writing, which also bring unconscious content to the surface. The case of the water diviner suggests that dissociation may heighten perceptual abilities. Similarly, hypnotic subjects sometimes exhibit an extraordinary sensitivity to sensory stimuli, perceiving details unnoticed by others. This hyperesthesia is akin to the heightened senses of a sleeping dog, which can discern an approaching figure by sound alone. A comparable phenomenon occurs in ordinary sleep. A mother may wake instantly at her baby's faintest whimper while ignoring louder noises. Such heightened sensitivity is not confined to hypnosis. Experiments by Binet demonstrated that, in certain cases, a hysteric's unconscious perception could be 50 times sharper than that of an average person. Likewise, studies on war neuroses recorded cases where hypersensitive hearing allowed soldiers to perceive distant sounds entirely inaudible to their comrades. One war-strained patient, traumatized by air raids, could recognize aircraft types solely by engine hum long before they were visible, though his hearing was otherwise unremarkable. In another case, a woman with an intense aversion to drafts seemed to sense the opening and closing of distant doors. Her uncanny accuracy was likely due to an unconscious sensitivity to subtle auditory cues rather than an extrasensory ability. Hyperesthesia, the exaggerated acuity of the senses, applies to various sensory modalities, including touch and sight. It does not indicate the emergence of a new faculty but rather the sharpening of existing ones. The key significance of hyperesthesia lies in its frequent association with dissociation, which may cause its effects to be misattributed to supernatural forces or unknown faculties. Dreams. The mystery of dreams has fascinated humanity for centuries, inspiring both superstition and serious study. The Old Testament reveals the significance the Jews attach to dreams, with the prophet Daniel demonstrating a psychological insight into their meanings. Even today, so-called dream books offer simplistic interpretations, but it is only in recent years that scientific inquiry has yielded valuable insights into the nature of dreams. Sigmund Freud pioneered modern dream analysis, though his theories, often controversial, have led some to dismiss his work entirely. Yet his core idea, that dreams provide a window into the unconscious, is now widely accepted. To understand dreams, we must first consider sleep itself, which represents an interruption of consciousness. Whatever mental activity persists during sleep occurs in a dissociated state, much like hypnosis, where suppressed thoughts and emotions resurface, shaping the dream world. While external stimuli may occasionally influence dreams, the deeper cause lies within the unconscious. Repressed memories and desires, long buried, struggle to emerge but are distorted by the mind's censor, which disguises them before they reach awareness. Because of this, dreams often appear fragmented or illogical. In psychoanalysis, uncovering the true meaning behind a dream requires bypassing the censor, a technique particularly useful in treating war trauma. Soldiers suffering from amnesia or nightmares can sometimes recover lost memories through careful dream analysis, a process that involves reliving the emotions of the dream and tracing them back to real-life experiences. A striking example of this method involved a soldier who had lost all memory of his wartime service. One of his recurring dreams involved a pleasure steamer entering a dark cavern filled with skeletons. 2 pirates in cocked hats led him and 6 others toward a distant light, but before reaching it, a ball of fire rushed toward him, waking him in terror. Initially, he failed to see any connection between the dream and his past. However, through guided visualization, he re-experienced the terror and, with the censor momentarily bypassed, suddenly cried out, "It's a Minenwerfer," a type of German trench mortar. Further probing revealed that the pleasure steamer represented the ship carrying him to war, the cavern was a tunnel, and the pirates were his commanding officers. The skeletons symbolized fallen comrades, the second cavern was a dugout, and the ball of fire was the explosion that had buried him alive. Crucially, because the patient uncovered these associations himself, rather than being told what to believe, the breakthrough led to real therapeutic progress. Beyond trauma, dreams also reveal hidden emotions. A businessman once recounted a dream in which he warmly shook hands with an old rival. When asked if he felt guilty about their past conflict, he admitted that he did, though he had never consciously recognized the feeling. Dreams, like slips of the tongue, often expose truths that the conscious mind resists acknowledging. Dreams also tap into forgotten memories. A personal example illustrates this. While ascending a staircase, I casually agreed with my wife's identification of a stuffed bird as a seagull. The following morning, I inexplicably recalled dreaming of my old schoolmaster, Mr. Gull, but failed to see the connection until my wife pointed it out. The mind's inability to recognize its own unconscious associations is a hallmark of dreams. Since dreams arise from a dissociated state, they share characteristics with other altered mental phenomena, such as automatic writing or divination. The unconscious often perceives subtle cues that escape conscious awareness, sometimes creating the illusion of prophetic dreams. However, genuine prophecy remains dubious. In my experience, only 2 dreams were claimed to have foretold future events: a railway accident and a house fire. Interestingly, both dreamers had histories of severe hysteria, suggesting that their unconscious minds may have been highly suggestible rather than clairvoyant. The biblical story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream supports the psychological nature of dream analysis. The troubled king could not recall his dream, yet demanded that his magicians interpret it under threat of death. Only the prophet Daniel succeeded. It is plausible that Daniel used a method akin to modern dream recovery, perhaps even hypnosis, to help the king reconstruct his forgotten vision. Rather than foreseeing the future, Nebuchadnezzar's dream likely reflected his deep-seated fears of downfall. His later descent into madness further supports the idea that he was a classic case of psychoneurosis. Ancient civilizations often claimed hidden knowledge of dreams, and figures like Daniel, possessing a keen understanding of the unconscious, may have been the true origin of mystical traditions. Far from supernatural, dream analysis remains one of the most revealing tools for exploring the mind's hidden depths. Hysteria. Imagine a world where the human mind weaves illusions so powerful that they mimic the most terrifying diseases, where a thought, buried deep in the unconscious, can paralyze a limb or steal a voice. This is the world of hysteria, a condition that has perplexed doctors, philosophers, and even battlefield generals for centuries. The very word hysteria carries with it the echoes of outdated beliefs. In ancient times, physicians thought that a woman's uterus, hystera in Greek, could roam freely through the body, causing strange and unpredictable symptoms. When that myth was abandoned, the condition was still linked to female anatomy, as if the mind could not be capable of such tricks on its own. It wasn't until the brilliant French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot peered into the minds of his patients in the late 19th century that hysteria was recognized as a disorder of the psyche. But even Charcot, a pioneer in hypnosis and the unconscious mind, became entangled in the very illusions he sought to understand. He inadvertently created symptoms in his patients through suggestion, leading to debates that continue to this day. Is hysteria purely psychological, or is there some hidden physical trigger? Different scholars have tried to define hysteria, yet their definitions seem to describe entirely different conditions. Babinski, the great French neurologist, claimed hysteria was simply a state of mind where symptoms could be implanted and erased through suggestion. Pierre Janet, another luminary, argued that hysteria was the result of a fractured consciousness, a splitting of the self into different personalities. And then there was Freud, whose radical theories linked hysteria to childhood trauma and repressed emotions, particularly those of a sexual nature. With so many theories, one might wonder, what does hysteria truly look like? The answer is anything and everything. A patient with hysteria might wake up blind, though their eyes function perfectly. Another might lose the ability to walk, yet show no signs of physical injury. Some tremble uncontrollably, while others enter deep trances. To the untrained eye, hysteria can be indistinguishable from epilepsy, paralysis, or even possession. During the Great War, hysteria took on a new name, shell shock. Soldiers, hardened by battle, would suddenly collapse, unable to move, speak, or even remember their own names. Many believed these symptoms were caused by the physical shockwaves of exploding shells, but the truth ran much deeper. These men had seen horrors beyond comprehension, and their minds, overwhelmed, had simply shut down. Their symptoms were not feigned, far from it. The war had fractured their very sense of self. One soldier, after being caught in a devastating bombardment, awoke to find himself completely mute. He had not suffered any physical injury, yet he remained silent for months. When finally encouraged to speak, he revealed that, in the heat of battle, he had fought in hand-to-hand combat and killed an enemy soldier with his bare hands. The trauma of that moment had been so unbearable that his mind had buried it, and with it, his voice. Only when he confronted the memory did his speech return. This is the essence of hysteria, a battle between two selves. One part of the mind desperately wants to heal, while the other, terrified of what lies buried, clings to the symptoms as a means of escape. The power of the mind in hysteria is almost supernatural. There have been patients who developed painful blisters or even bruises, simply because they believed they had been burned. Others have driven needles deep into their own flesh, convinced that their suffering was real. Some cases are so extreme that entire limbs become rigid and deformed, as though shaped by an invisible force. In one particularly chilling case, a young woman, who had lived a life of quiet obedience, suddenly lost the ability to walk. When questioned, she insisted she was ill, and doctors treated her accordingly. But hidden beneath her symptoms was a secret, a deep resentment toward her family, a longing for independence. The illness had given her what she could not claim for herself, freedom. But as the days passed, the illness became her prison. She wanted to recover, yet something within her would not allow it. Only when she recognized this conflict, only when she acknowledged her hidden desires, did her legs regain their strength. So what truly lies at the heart of hysteria? Is it the body rebelling against the mind? Is it a subconscious cry for help? Or is it, as Adler suggested, a desperate attempt to seize power over one's own fate? Perhaps hysteria is all of these things, and more. For hysteria is not merely an illness. It is a story written in the hidden corners of the mind, waiting to be uncovered. Experiments, domestic, and other. Welcome to a world where parlor tricks flirt with the supernatural, where a swinging watch might reveal hidden forces, and where a simple table can become a portal to the unknown, or so some would have you believe. In this chapter, we dive into the psychology behind these so-called occult experiments and uncover the very human mechanisms at play. We begin with the classic party trick of thought reading. A person leaves the room while the group selects an action for them to perform upon their return, perhaps moving an object or setting a clock. When they re-enter, the audience concentrates on the task while the performer attempts to make their mind a blank. Miraculously, they often succeed. But is this true telepathy, or something else? The answer lies in subtle, unconscious cues, facial expressions, sighs, even slight changes in posture. These tiny signals are picked up by the performer's sharpened senses, leading them toward the right action, all while making it seem like magic. Then there's the swinging pendulum experiment. Hold a weight on a string, stare at it, and believe it will move, and it does. But this isn't mystical energy at work. It's the power of unconscious muscle movements, responding to expectation and suggestion. The same principle underlies table turning, automatic writing, and even spirit tapping. A group of people sit with their hands on a table, concentrating, until, lo and behold, the table begins to tilt and shift. Spirits, or mere muscle twitches amplified by shared belief? The answer is clear, it's all an illusion, but one powerful enough to convince even the most rational minds. The chapter also explores the phenomenon of automatic writing, where people produce messages supposedly dictated by spirits. One famous case involves two men deeply invested in the history of Glastonbury Abbey. Through automatic writing, they channeled long-lost information about the abbey's ruins. Was this supernatural insight? Or simply their own unconscious minds, brimming with forgotten knowledge, shaping the narrative? The book leans toward the latter, human memory and suggestion working their strange magic. And finally, we arrive at the ultimate danger, when belief in these tricks turns into something deeper, something darker. What begins as a harmless parlor game can lead to full-blown dissociation, where people genuinely believe they're channeling spirits or forces beyond themselves. The unconscious mind, once untethered, can craft entire realities, ones that feel just as real as the physical world around us. In the end, whether it's a watch swinging in your hands, a table moving beneath your fingertips, or a medium whispering words from beyond the grave, one truth remains: it's not spirits at work. It's us. Our own minds, our own expectations, our own unconscious selves, creating the illusion of the extraordinary. About mediums. Step into the shadowy world of seance rooms, whispered prophecies, and so-called supernatural revelations. In this chapter, we unravel the enigma of mediums, their tricks, their psychology, and the powerful human need to believe in something beyond. The author starts with a fundamental question: are mediums frauds, or is there something more at work? He dismisses the easy explanation that all are simple tricksters, pointing out that even respected men of science have vouched for the authenticity of certain mediums. Yet, as we peel back the layers, we see a spectrum, from conscious deceivers to true believers, individuals who have lost themselves in their own dissociative states. Instead of being recognized as psychologically vulnerable, they are hailed as possessing extraordinary gifts. The author shares his own experience with a much-hyped medium. Expecting clear-cut, indisputable spirit revelations, he instead witnesses a clumsy performance of guesswork and fishing for clues. The medium hides his eyes behind a hand, peeking between his fingers to gauge reactions. He starts with vague questions: is the name George? No? Georgina? Waiting for any sign of recognition from the audience. Each small confirmation is stretched and reshaped into an impressive-sounding revelation, fooling those eager to believe. When the medium stumbles, believers justify the errors as proof of how difficult spirit communication must be. One particularly telling moment occurs when the medium, eyeing an elderly woman, confidently states she has kidney trouble. The author, who had suspected the same, is impressed, until it turns out both he and the medium were wrong. If they had been right, however, the medium would have received full credit. Such is the nature of belief in these settings. When the author's turn comes, he decides to play along, feeding the medium false leads to see how they are incorporated into the seance. To his astonishment, not only does the medium accept the misinformation as truth, but the assembled believers also reinforce it. When the author later reveals that much of what he had confirmed was untrue, the believers simply rationalize away the contradiction. After all, if the spirits were misled, how could they possibly give truthful messages in return? The chapter then turns to a famous case, Sir Oliver Lodge, a distinguished scientist, and his alleged spirit communications with his deceased son, Raymond. The book Raymond documents these supposed messages from the afterlife, but the author exposes the same old tricks, leading questions, vague descriptions, and ambiguous statements retroactively fitted to known facts. A medium describes a brownie-colored earth with bits sticking up and bits lower down, and Sir Oliver insists this must refer to Woolacombe Sands, his family's beachside retreat. But could it not describe any coastline? Another instance involves a yacht with sails that didn't run on water, which, after some mental gymnastics, is interpreted as a failed land yacht experiment. Every guess, whether right or wrong, is twisted into evidence of spirit communication. Yet the real danger, the author argues, is not the trickery itself, it is the widespread belief that these performances hold divine truth. Mediums are now seen as prophets, shaping people's understanding of life and death. The author compares modern spiritualism to the ancient story of the Witch of Endor, where King Saul sought messages from beyond the grave. Then, as now, believers heard what they wanted to hear, turning vague and trivial statements into grand revelations. The chapter closes with a sobering thought: while spiritualism may offer comfort, it is built on self-deception and suggestibility. In chasing whispers from the beyond, we risk ignoring the far richer truths of the world before us. The accounts of believers. One is repeatedly faced with a story of the marvelous and invited to explain it away or believe in the supernatural. My favorite way of dealing with such a proposition is to borrow a pack of cards, invite the storyteller to take a card, and, without letting me see it, to think of it whilst holding my hand. After a silent pause, I name the card and may be told, of course, that's a trick. But if I assure my friends that the spirits have told me the name of the card, I am called a scoffer. Somehow, a pack of cards is not spiritual enough. Some stories are hard to explain without full evidence, and here is one of them. A friend assured me that in Raymond there was an account of how one of Sir Oliver Lodge's family went to London to visit a medium, and how after she had started, some others of the family met in Birmingham. There, calling up the spirit of Raymond, they asked him to say Honolulu at the London séance. Sure enough, at the London séance held on the same day, Honolulu came into the spirit talk. This account is substantially correct, and the incident seems inexplicable, so far. Sir Oliver Lodge himself says of the episode. 1. It establishes a reality about the home sittings. 2. It so entirely eliminates anything of the nature of collusion, conscious or unconscious. 3. The whole circumstances of the test make it an exceedingly good one. Then, after suggesting telepathy as an explanation, he writes, I venture to say there is no normal explanation, since in my judgment chance is out of the question. If the information had stopped at this, no explanation on natural lines would be possible. But so painfully honest is Sir Oliver that in the same book, he supplies full material for such an explanation. At a London séance on December 20, 1915, with the same medium, there occurs the following exchange. Question, what used he to sing? Answer, hello halolo, sounds like hululu hululo, something about Hottentot, but he is going back a long way, he thinks. On April 11, 1916, a song of Raymond's is found, with the words written in pencil. Any little flower from a tulip to a rose. If you'll be Mrs. John James Brown. Of Honolulu town. This song fits neatly with the medium's earlier revelation. And now, an interesting question arises, was the medium informed of her success? We are not told. But we do find that when another medium had hit the mark with a sentence now interpreted as a warning of Raymond's death before it took place, Sir Oliver wrote to the daughter of the medium. The reference to the poet and Faunus in your mother's last script is quite intelligible, and a good classical allusion. You might tell the communicator sometime if there is opportunity. Plainly, he was eager to let his mediums know when they succeeded. And it is fair to suggest that the Honolulu medium found out she had hit the mark, the interpretation of the gibberish being Honolulu, though Hottentot had failed to score. A medium will always follow up a lucky shot, and it needs not even an appeal to chance to explain the repetition of the word at the next sitting. The verification was on May 26, the date of the simultaneous test, when the following words were used. The medium, you could play. N-M-L, play what? The medium, not a game, a music. N-M-L, I'm afraid I can't, Raymond. Feda, sotto voce, she can't do that. The medium, he wanted to know whether you could play Hulu Honolulu. One of the strongest evidential stories in the book is thus explained without calling upon the supernatural. And if this story can be explained naturally, any others lose their value, even if no explanation can be based on the available facts. But apart from this explanation, the choice of the test word is revealing. With an entire dictionary and all of geography to choose from, the family selected a sound that had already occurred in a previous revelation, and therefore had a chance of being repeated. If in his laboratory days, Sir Oliver examined a substance for the presence of arsenic, he would first test his reagents for arsenic, lest they contain a trace of it and ruin the experiment. Yet here, the experimenters did the equivalent of selecting an arsenic-contaminated test tube to use in an analysis for arsenic. How did the word Honolulu come to be selected? Had the family exercised ordinary caution, they would certainly have chosen a word that had not occurred before. But, though they are probably sensible people in ordinary life, when they turn to the spirit world, they fall prey to their dissociated streams, in which was the knowledge that the word, or something like it, had been used before and was likely to be used again. Hence, these believers, guided by their subconscious minds, were effectively cooking the experiment. Among my card tricks is the elementary one, technically known as forcing a card, described at the beginning of this chapter. But I may also let someone choose a card from a pack while my back is turned. Then, after the card is placed back in the deck, I do some other trick entirely. It is common for audience members to confound these tricks, assuring others that I had let them pick a card on scene and then named it by thought reading. Such a performance is beyond me. But a like garbled account is characteristic of the stories we hear about séances. The storytellers are in a state of mental confusion, they add or subtract details to make the result more emphatic, their critical faculties are suspended, and we are asked to swallow the final product and confess ourselves believers. After considering my own experiences and the evidence produced by Sir Oliver Lodge, I have reached a conclusion. No one desirous of believing only the truth can accept anything supernormal without the strictest investigation, on the spot, aided by a knowledge of trickery, verbal or material, and an awareness of the results produced by dissociation and logic-tight compartments in the minds of the would-be honest. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle shows how convincing a twice-told tale becomes. In the New Revelation he writes, "Or once again, if Raymond can tell us of a photograph no copy of which had reached England, and which proved to be exactly as he described it, and if he can give us, through the lips of strangers, all sorts of details of his home life, which his own relatives had to verify before they found them to be true, is it unreasonable to suppose that he is fairly accurate in his description of his own experiences and state of life at the moment at which he is communicating?" The words "can tell us of a photograph no copy of which had reached England" suggest that the medium revealed the photograph's existence. But fortunately, the original account is accessible. Here is what actually happened. The relation to witchcraft. This relation between spiritualism and witchcraft is not a fantasy of my unconscious. Listen to this from another believer. The dangers of the spiritual world are greater because, bad as a man living on our plane may be, he cannot compare in that respect with a thoroughly wicked denizen of the fourth-dimensional space, whose power is all the greater because his very existence is almost universally denied. What little good was ever in him has been blotted out in the course, perhaps, of centuries. His cunning passes earthly comprehension, his experience of the ways and foibles of humanity is profound, his malignity is dreadful. To be fully under the influence of such an entity as this is to be at his mercy, and, as no such word exists in his vocabulary, the end is a foregone conclusion, unless another force of a contrary character and at least as powerful is directed against him. It is indeed fortunate that the existence of these entities is almost universally denied. Hangings and burnings would be soon in fashion again if any large proportion of us were influenced by such a horrible complex. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has given an account to the papers, Daily Telegraph, February 18, 1919, of a séance in Wales. Hymns were sung to produce a suitable emotional state, and the lights were turned down in order to obtain the proper conditions, because ether transmits light, and is also the source of all psychic phenomena. Then, the medium being tied down, a tambourine rattled, and a coat and furniture flew about. The bearing of this upon life in the hereafter, which Sir Arthur discusses in connection with the performance, is not clear, but the effects are identical with those produced by the Davenport brothers, who were exposed in 1868. The list of witnesses, who numbered about 20, leads me to remark that though in a multitude of counselors there may be wisdom, yet in a crowd of witnesses there is herd instinct. With a conspicuous member of the herd like Sir Arthur in the lead, the sway of emotion will dull any criticism, and if a few are unconvinced they will remain silent. The statement that ether is the source of all psychic phenomena is startling, but unsupported. Another believer, Sir William Crookes, says, concerning exhibitions of what he calls psychic force, that everything recorded has taken place in the light. So there seems to be some fundamental error about the observations of one of them. But Sir William's results were obtained from the famous Daniel Home, whose years of experience and credulity allowed him to take risks which the humble beginners in Wales hardly dared. The failure of critical observation. Sir William Crookes gives detailed accounts of marvelous happenings, but two mediums in whom he had implicit trust were detected in deliberate fraud by other people, so that his critical powers failed him. Some of his accounts show curious lapses. In one experiment an accordion is placed in a cage under the table, and Mr. Home puts his hand into the top of the cage to do psychic things with the instrument. The temperature of the room is carefully recorded, that doesn't matter, but imparts a scientific flavor to the observations, although we are not told why the experiment was done under the table instead of in a more convenient position on top of it. Sir William would never have made such an omission if he had been using the same reasoning powers that he used in his scientific descriptions. It is noticeable that the chief scientific supporters of spiritualism are eminent in physical science. They have been trained in a world where honesty is assumed to be a quality of all workers. A laboratory assistant who played a trick upon one of them would find his career at an end, and ordinary cunning is foreign to them. When they enter upon the world of dissociates, where deceit masquerades under the disguise of transparent honesty, these eminent men are but as babes, country cousins in the hands of confidence-tricked men, and their opinions are of less value than those of a smart schoolboy. The spirit photography fraud. A friend of mine, with a decided tendency to belief in the reality of spirit photography, was good enough to show me photographs of himself with spirit forms beside him and undertook to repeat his visit to the photographer, who is accepted as genuine by leading spiritualists. The photographer allows you to bring your own plates, goes with you into the darkroom, and allows you to initial the plate before it is put in the frame. Whether it is your plate which you mark depends upon the will and dexterity of the artist, aided by the darkness and a preliminary hymn and prayer which should remove all doubts from your mind. To test this, I provided my friend with a packet of 4 plates, 3 of which had been exposed so that on being developed, they would show a very conspicuous cross. At the séance, 2 plates were exposed and developed, 1 showed a cross, 1 did not. The photographer, now aware that at least 1 plate was marked, developed the remaining 2, and both showed the cross. There had been no substitution, but no spirit photographs either. The enduring delusion. The reader must not think that my aim is to convert spiritualists from their belief. It is, as I have tried to show in earlier chapters, useless to attack rationalizations in an effort to penetrate a logic-tight compartment. As soon as one defense is broken down, another is built up. One can only take comfort from the history of other examples of pseudodoxia epidemica, as Sir Thomas Browne called them, and look forward to the fading away of this delusion. Just as the belief in witchcraft passed away from the educated and intelligent, lingering only amongst the ignorant, so this delusion will pass and leave our descendants to wonder how some of us came to be its victims. The evolution of the medium. It all began with an encounter, an introduction to the world of the supernatural through a man who, to any reasonable observer, seemed to be an artful deceiver. And yet, even in his deception, there was a peculiar sincerity. Perhaps he was not consciously aware of his own falsehoods, a notion supported by countless cases throughout history where individuals genuinely believed in their own extraordinary powers, despite their evident trickery. To make sense of such paradoxes, we must look deeper into the mind and recognize 3 distinct paths that lead one into the realm of the supernatural. The first is the path of the deliberate deceiver, the one who knowingly fabricates illusions for gain or amusement. The second, more complex, is the path of the one who, through a subtle erosion of self-awareness, represses the knowledge of their own deceit, becoming what we might call a dissociate. And then, the third, the most intriguing of all, is the path of those who never recognize their own deception, led astray by their unconscious mind until they, too, become lost in their own illusions. How does one fall into such a state? The journey is slow, insidious, and often begins in innocence. Consider the tale of David Sludge, a mere servant boy whose fate was sealed not by malice, but by circumstance. His first deception, a small, trivial claim, was met with immediate rejection. But when he stumbled into the realm of the supernatural, whispering tales of ghosts and unseen forces, he found not scorn, but fascination. Encouraged, he fed the belief of those around him, until belief became expectation, and expectation became a trap. Could he have stopped? Could any of them? The deeper one falls into the role, the harder it is to escape. The mind, so adept at self-preservation, begins to mold reality around the illusion. In this, the medium is no different from the patient afflicted by hysteria, who, though initially feigning an ailment, eventually experiences symptoms that feel utterly real. The lie is buried so deeply beneath layers of justification that it ceases to be a lie at all. There is an odd uniformity in the tales of spiritualists. Names like the Fox Sisters, Slade, Eglinton, and Aesopia Palladino appear and reappear in texts, their stories recycled, their deception sometimes admitted, sometimes vehemently denied. Yet even when fraud is exposed, belief does not waver, it merely shifts. A medium caught cheating is, in the minds of their followers, simply a medium who cheated that one time. And when deception is not uncovered, reverence is placed upon their honesty, as if the absence of proof were proof itself. In all discussions of mediumship, there are 3 names that remain sacred: Home, Stainton Moses, and Mrs. Piper, individuals never caught in the act of deception, yet requiring endless affirmations of their sincerity. Take, for instance, Stainton Moses, a man whose automatic writing and spirit messages were lauded as divine communication. One account tells of his uncanny ability to reveal details of a recent tragedy, a man killed in Baker Street beneath the crushing weight of a steamroller. He could not have known, his followers claimed. But could he? A fleeting glance at a newspaper, a snippet of overheard conversation, all buried within the unconscious, only to resurface as divine revelation. What, then, of Mrs. Piper? A woman so trusted that even great minds, such as Sir Oliver Lodge and Professor William James, stake their reputations upon her integrity. But belief is a powerful thing. The certainty of an honest soul, the unwavering conviction in their own experience, these make deception all the more convincing. A liar may falter, but one who believes their own illusions never does. In the end, it is the nature of the mind itself that allows such figures to thrive. The unconscious, vast and enigmatic, holds the capacity for extraordinary deceit. It remembers what the conscious mind forgets, it builds upon whispers and fragments until they solidify into something tangible. And those who fall into its embrace, whether by choice or by fate, find themselves lost in a world where truth and illusion are indistinguishable. The evolution of the medium is not a tale of fraudsters and charlatans alone. It is a study of belief, of the fragile line between reality and deception, and of the haunting truth that sometimes, the most convincing of lies are the ones we tell ourselves. One of the most intriguing cases I have encountered, began Mr. Hereward Carrington, a spiritualist of notable critical prowess, is one that I consider remarkably significant from a psychological standpoint. It was the early summer of 1911 when a gentleman, a lawyer by profession, approached Carrington, claiming to know of an exceptional physical medium, one reminiscent of the famed Aesopia Palladino. This medium, also a lawyer, professed a scientific curiosity regarding the supernatural occurrences surrounding him and sought explanations for the astonishing manifestations that had unfolded over the past 3.5 years. With such an introduction, Carrington was intrigued and arranged an evening for a private demonstration. The two gentlemen arrived, and after a preliminary discussion, the séance began. A broom was placed upon the floor. The medium, kneeling over it, positioned his fingers lightly on either side of the handle before slowly withdrawing them. To the astonishment of the witnesses, the broom appeared to rise into the air, suspending momentarily before dropping to the ground. The effect was striking, seemingly authentic in its simplicity. At first, Carrington was fascinated. But then, he noticed a peculiarity: each object the medium manipulated was placed suspiciously close to his knees. Sensing deception, Carrington focused his observation, not on the floating objects, but on the space between the medium's legs. His scrutiny soon revealed the truth: a fine black thread stretched between his knees, forming a loop. Each object, as it was placed down, was subtly slipped into this loop. The rest was mere balance and physics. Rather than expose the fraud immediately, Carrington arranged another séance, this time at the office of Dr. Gustav Sayer. The demonstration was identical to the first. However, this time, the thread audibly snapped, twice. On the first occasion, the medium excused himself, returned, and resumed his tricks. But on the second break, he declared himself exhausted and unable to continue. The deception was undeniable. It was the most blatant and unashamed fraud I had ever witnessed, Carrington concluded. Yet, what puzzled him was the young lawyer's persistent, almost compulsive, deception. Why fabricate such phenomena when his credibility and reputation were at stake? The case was dismissed, but it posed an important question: why had so many failed to detect the fraud over 3.5 years? The answer lay in human psychology. When reputable individuals vouch for an experience, others become less inclined to question it. The social dynamics of belief and the herd instinct suppress individual skepticism, much like how an illusionist's trick is safer from exposure before a large audience than a small one. Carrington's case was but one example of mediumship under scrutiny. Yet, paradoxically, he approached the famed Aesopia Palladino with less skepticism. Many researchers had caught Palladino resorting to trickery, yet her defenders maintained that, despite occasional fraud, she was a genuine medium. Scientific men had vouched for her abilities. This blind spot in critical examination fascinated the author. Why had Carrington, so quick to condemn the young lawyer, extended grace to Palladino? The distinction, it seemed, lay in perception. When a medium fails under test conditions, they are discredited. However, when a medium, like Palladino, occasionally succeeds, she is granted credibility despite numerous exposures. Her physical symptoms, writhing, sighing, nausea, and paralysis, were interpreted as signs of spiritual exertion, rather than hysteria. Yet, as any clinician could affirm, such symptoms were classic manifestations of dissociation and psychological distress. Mediums, the narrator posits, are often indistinguishable from those suffering from hysteria. The emotional dissociation experienced by so-called clairvoyants mirrors that of individuals afflicted by post-traumatic stress. Consider the case of a war veteran, haunted by fragmented memories, who unconsciously weaves reality with fantasy, creating a tapestry of visions. To an untrained observer, such a person might appear to possess the gift of second sight. In truth, they are struggling against the forces of their unconscious mind. This parallel extends to the world of séance. Many mediums may initially engage in trickery for personal gain, but in time, their own deceptions entrap them. The human mind, when repeatedly fed falsehoods, can blur the line between fact and fiction, leading even the fraudster to believe in their own illusions. Thus, the proliferation of books instructing the bereaved on how to speak with the dead is particularly concerning. These guides, under the guise of spiritual enlightenment, advocate for methods that encourage dissociation. Sit alone, in darkness, with expectant silence, they advise, subtly inducing a state akin to hypnosis. From such a vulnerable condition, it is but a short step to hallucination, hysteria, and self-deception. Worse still, the embrace of spiritualism by intellectuals lends undue legitimacy to these practices. Men of science who ignore the psychological underpinnings of mediumship unwittingly foster a cycle of delusion. Their endorsement can turn an act of minor deception into a fully fledged disorder, as the medium begins to lose sight of where their trickery ends and their powers begin. The tragedy of spiritualism, then, is not merely its deception but its impact on the human psyche. It is a practice that can lead its adherents down a path of dissociation and self-delusion. In fostering belief in the supernatural, it risks encouraging psychological distress rather than alleviating it. So, as we listen to the tales of levitating brooms and whispered messages from beyond the grave, let us ask ourselves, are we witnessing a true phenomenon, or merely the fragile interplay of human psychology and belief? Conclusion. Although I have emphasized the role of dissociation in shaping beliefs and actions, dissociation itself is only one manifestation of the unconscious. It is the unconscious mind that is becoming the true field of research for understanding the causes of human behavior. From an evolutionary standpoint, consciousness is a late development. In rising above the animal world, humans sacrificed many advantages. Physically, they are surpassed by other creatures. As consciousness gained prominence, the realm of unconscious action diminished. A bird, for instance, does not need foresight to build its nest. The impulse to build arises, and the bird obeys. When migration time comes, there is no deliberate planning, no consideration of routes or destinations. The bird simply goes. Similarly, the wasp that constructs a brood cell, fills it with paralyzed prey, and lays an egg inside has no knowledge of the future. We marvel at the intelligence behind such actions, yet a child who ties a rag around a stick and names it demonstrates more initiative than any other animal. McDougall defines instinct as an innate psychophysical tendency to pay attention to objects of a certain class, to experience emotional excitement of a peculiar quality upon perceiving them, and to act, or feel an impulse to act, in a particular way toward that object. This definition illustrates how instinct alone allows birds and insects, creatures governed largely by the unconscious, to carry out the fundamental tasks of life. Even what appears to be reason or memory in animals can often be traced back to unconscious processes. Consider the unreasonable fears and obsessions of a shell-shocked soldier. They stem from causes outside his awareness, much like the child who fears fire long after a forgotten burn. A chick that once tastes a bitter caterpillar will forever avoid its kind, not necessarily due to memory as we understand it, but because an unconscious emotional reaction has been conditioned. Just as the soldier's compulsion to attack his companion, as discussed in Chapter 8, originated in the unconscious, so too do many animal behaviors we attribute to memory. Interestingly, McDougall's definition of instinct also applies to obsessions, the difference being that obsessions are acquired rather than innate. This similarity underscores the fact that both arise from the unconscious. Although human beings are driven by unconscious instincts and memories, they live within a stream of consciousness and tend to assume that all thoughts and actions stem from it. Yet, because the most recently evolved functions are also the least stable, human consciousness is highly variable. It fluctuates between controlling the unconscious and being controlled by it. The ideal human mind would be perfectly integrated, free from internal contradictions, with no hidden complexes, complete access to memory, emotions aligned with their true causes, and instincts properly acknowledged and directed. However, such a mind would find life in this world intolerable. Far from this ideal, we find minds in which the unconscious has overtaken or distorted consciousness. A person whose consciousness has failed to develop properly may suffer from idiocy or imbecility. Others, overwhelmed by unconscious distortions, may follow dissociated streams of thought so intensely that they fall within the legal definition of insanity. Between these extremes lies the majority of mankind. The practical, matter-of-fact individual relies on a few carefully maintained logic-tight compartments to reconcile himself with reality. The artist, poet, or wanderer, on the other hand, embraces emotions from the unconscious as central to life. Others, struggling with inner conflicts between their desires and the external world, misdirect their emotions and fall into neurosis. Then there are those who construct elaborate fantasies from their unconscious, mistaking them for external realities. These are the seers and mystics, along with their modern counterparts, the mediums, clairvoyants, and those who sincerely believe in their own illusions. For every medium, there is a willing believer. Each feeds into the other's delusion. The medium, with the dissociated mind highly sensitive to suggestion, absorbs the smallest cues and reflects them back as supposed spiritual revelations. If necessary, he may even resort to deliberate trickery. The believer, in turn, has his own logic-tight compartment, one that allows him to accept the weakest evidence as proof of the supernatural. When two such dissociated minds work together, their mutually reinforced delusions may produce phenomena that seem impossible to explain. The study of the unconscious is a legitimate field of inquiry. Those who explore it knowingly, using dissociation as a tool, may uncover valuable insights into the workings of the human mind. But those who surrender themselves to the belief that dissociated thoughts, whether their own or another's, are messages from a spirit world may one day find themselves saying, "Had I seen, perhaps, what hand was holding mine, leading me whither, I had died of fright." Thank you for listening. This has been a brief journey into deeper thought. Return when the silence calls again.